Afternoon, guys. I thought it was a fascinating session earlier where the guys were talking about the changing technology and how a lot of guys' jobs may become redundant and things like that. Whilst it sounds very enticing to be sitting under a tree drinking beer and trading stocks and earning money, I still think there's a lot of scope for planners and engineers to help with the urban development and the actual infrastructure and urban form challenges. So I'm just going to share with you, in a country, some urban renewal and planning that we've been busy with. Probably not in most investors' focus, but I think that's going to change shortly. So I'm going to go into a fair bit of detail about the project, how we're trying to improve the economy and make it more livable in Guinea. Okay, the project is the master plan and the urban design of the KALOUM and Loose Islands in Guinea. A lot of people are not actually sure where that is, but I'll show you on the map. Okay, Guinea is in West Africa, and not to be confused with Papua New Guinea or Equatorial Guinea or Guinea-Bissau. Guinea is actually located below Guinea-Bissau, and then it's bordered by Senegal, Mali, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Our particular project is in the city of Conakry, and it focuses on a small area of Conakry, the district of KALOUM, and then you can see in green the Loose Islands. The district of KALOUM actually was one of the islands. There was originally 6 islands of Loose, and then with infill, the land parcel was connected to the mainland. So that is the peninsula of Conakry. You can see in the brown areas is all the development of Conakry. It's about 40 kilometers in extent, from coast up to the mountains, Mount Kakaluma, where the city gets its water supply from. So our project scope is the KALOUM district. You can see it's quite densely populated. It's the current CBD of Conakry, and then the Loose Islands directly off KALOUM. Extent of the project is about 1,400 hectares of island and about 500 hectares of KALOUM, and these islands are located quite uniquely within 4 kilometers by ferry of the CBD. Just a bit of background on Guinea. It's not a country that most of us are familiar with. I myself had to learn all about it going through the project. It was very interesting. Guinea, it was actually the first Francophone country or French country to gain independence from the French. I think in about 58, Charles de Gaulle said, "Would you like the choice of autonomy or independence?" And Guinea immediately chose independence, and the French beat a hasty retreat very quickly in 58. Just in terms of the country, the climate, tropical monsoon climate, receives an extraordinary amount of rainfall, almost 4 meters of rainfall, so very high. Population about 10.5 million. Religion, mostly Islam, some Christianity. But about the economy, it's a small economy, talking only about $500 GDP per capita, compared to South Africa of about 5,000-6,000, compared to the US of about 50,000, 60,000. So yeah, small population, and growth projection about 4.9%. Very interesting, Guinea is very rich in minerals. It has 2/3 of the world's bauxite, which is used in aluminium, and then it has the largest iron ore deposit in the world. But that iron ore has not been exploited. I think guys started, but for various reasons, drop in pricing and rumors of bribery and corruption, that has not happened. It also has 7 million hectares of arable land, and then the country is large. It's broken up into 4 regions: Maritime Guinea, Middle Guinea, Upper Guinea, and Forested Guinea. So in terms of the positives for Guinea, it has a good coastline, tourism potential, historic slave sites, vast minerals, which includes diamonds and golds in addition to the bauxite and the iron ore, massive agricultural potential, abundant rainfall, hydropower, forests, and diverse landscape. On the negative side, the infrastructure is poor and lacks connectivity between the buildings, low production, poorly skilled and qualified staff, and there's a high mortality rate, poor basic and social services, and then poor participation amongst the population in terms of sustainability of natural resources, high illiteracy rate, poverty, and lack of diversity in the economy. 84% of the economy is driven off agriculture, and the remainder in the mining and financial and transport sectors and such. So then looking again at Conakry, in terms of urbanization, it's probably lower than the average. It's probably about 30% urbanized, with most of the guys living in the rural areas, but that is changing. And then within Conakry, it's quite unique, because only developments happened on that peninsula, because the adjacent landforms are all swamps. So you've got 50% of the urban population living on 1% of the actual country's footprint. So it's about 15% of the population, about 2 million out of 12 living in Conakry. Just in terms of colonial planning, the French colonized Conakry in the early 1900s, and their purpose was purely to establish a port and an administrative function, and then transport connectivity inland for resources. On the bottom left-hand side is the town planning of the island of Tombo. Just looking a bit closely at that town planning really isn't informed the kind of urbanism that's experienced in Conakry. On the left side in the orange, there was the administrative capital, and then the back of port, and the portion in the middle is the main sort of CBD. Then the rest of the area was planned as labor quarters. So there was segregation in this, and much of that is still seen today. It's resulted in this sort of splintered urbanism, where you've got the previous native district, which is in an unhealthy area, and then the other administrative area was the French district, which is well maintained. So just zooming in there, you can actually see from the historical planning, on the left, the administration is nice and clean, and then the native areas on the right is a lot of slum development. So that is the district of KALOUM, that is the main CBD. And again, you can see the taller buildings in the administrative area, and then you can see the slum developments, and you can see some development has changed place, but largely the planning from the colonial planning has influenced the kind of urbanism the guys experience. In terms of infrastructure challenges, the shoreline is littered with solid waste. Waste collection is done by small, medium enterprises, but they use small containers and they transfer the waste to these skips. So it's not good equipment that they're using. They transfer that to a transfer station, and that's transferred to an existing landfill site. Now, the practice is not good. There's no compaction, there's no lining, and this is right against a residential area that's expanded right up to the landfill site. So not a desirable situation at all. In terms of stormwater, it's an open sort of channel system that collects a lot of waste. There's health risks. Guinea was at the center of the Ebola breakout some years ago, so clearly there are problems. The existing infrastructure is damaged, as well as the island suffers from major flooding when it coincides with high tides. The pictures there don't actually do it justice. At the moment, they're having their high rainfall, and typically cars are underwater in that. In terms of water, the quality coming from Mount Kakaloum is good, but supply constraints only deliver about 25 liters per person today. In terms of World Health Organizations, that's very low and presents a higher health risk. The target is more like 50 to 60 liters per day, which provides an intermediate access. The system is old. Some of the pipes go back to the French ductile iron pipes in the 1900s. Experiences a lot of losses. Revenue recovery is pretty low on that. And then pressure reductions are applied to reduce the leaks. And then in terms of sewer, the infrastructure is aging. There are 5 pump stations on the island serving the sewer. There is a existing 7 megaliter treatment works that was built by the World Bank. It's a lagoon system on there. It's about 7 hectares that you see in the picture there. Now, unfortunately, that system is not operational. Due to a land dispute, that is not being used. So the entire sewer is being discharged into the ocean at present. In terms of power, there's a power station on the island. It's a heavy fuel power station, 240 megawatts. It actually serves a lot of power of probably half the country of Guinea. It is connected to major overhead line, which is connected to inland hydro. But the problem with the hydro, it's seasonal. So you have heavy rainfall 3 months, you get the power, and you don't have continuity. But they are busy with new dams further upstream that will increase the continuity of power. In terms of the planning approach, critical success factors for successful cities, our philosophy, it's not just about the iconic buildings, but it's also based on the foundations, what you don't see beneath the ground, having good governance, institutional capacity, and good infrastructure. Just our planning approach, when we look at a master plan, we look at the position. What is it? It is financial capital, is it tourism? What is the position? What is the reason behind the city? Vertical and horizontal integration, we have a look at that to make sure our master plans align with national development plans, regional plans, and then in terms of horizontal, environmental constraints, and other planning initiatives going on. We also look at long-term proactive planning, how city centers change and disperse, and to plan for that. A comprehensive master plan that has consistent and clear guidelines and regulations, and it must be also a well-communicated plan. Investors should be aware of what the long-term vision is. And then also must be a clear and distinctive vision with targets and key performance indicators, as well as strategies, and it's broken up into projects. Also, the data should be integrated, managed in GIS, as well as should be a comprehensive plan that is transparent. Typically, our plans are then shared online, so when developers apply, they know what to adhere to. And then creating a vision, an endearing city that embraces heritage and culture. And then lastly, that the implementation is critical, that it's broken down into strategies and projects. So this was our program. It was a 7.5-month project where we looked at the tasks: positioning, visioning, programming, urban development, urban design, implementation plan, the master plan launch, and integrated capacity building to ensure that the guys pick up the plan and actually run with it, and it doesn't just collect dust. And then throughout the process is stakeholder engagement of various committees, ministries, community, and private sector. Existing planning documents. This does form part of a greater vision. The European Union conducted the study, Grand Conakry Vision 2040. So some of their key objectives were decongesting the peninsula and distributing nodes beyond that peninsula, as well as then creating a new port for the minerals, because at present the minerals exit through Conakry. Yeah, and then that looks at longer term linkages, linking up West African highway. Other objectives is very congested on Conakry Peninsula. So the guys are looking at various BRTs. So they do have the densities to support the BRTs, but it's not articulated density. It's fairly uniform across. So introducing BRT, there's the opportunity for TOD corridors, and then articulating higher densities along those corridors to support it. Other strategies were then to convert from road to pipeline. At the moment, fuels are carried by trucks, and they convert to rail, and then also running freight at night. And then the other strategies, KALOUM is right at the end. It's not good for long term to develop a CBD, so there's the strategy to then reposition the CBD at KALOUM, the dot in the red, and then put some of the logistics, stuff that's congesting the port at the moment, further out the dot in purple. Some of the key projects is port expansion, growth. That water treatment plant I spoke about, it has been reclaimed, so there's a potential to convert that to a leisure facility and deal with the waste in a different manner. And then there's the new CBD planned in a more central location, and then a dry logistics port planned further out. And then the other one I mentioned about the existing landfill at GUINEA, it's a disaster, and then the guys have looked at 3 other sites outside of Conakry. Another project the government came up with, this is called the Kanish project. In the middle, you've got the existing peninsula, but the guys, to reduce the congestion, have had a look at building highways out on the coast. And then the orange areas are to reclaim land. Personally, I don't think this is a very good idea, because that's insensitive environmental mangroves. I think they rather need to change the transport system on there and change the land use on that. But these are the kind of things we had to take into account. In terms of visioning and programming, in terms of the economic outlook, IMF show from 2010 to 2020, they expect a doubling, a 50% increase of the GDP, and GDP per capita is growing at about 5% per annum. So, yeah, good growth potential. In terms of population on KALOUM itself, it's actually reducing the population because it's undesirable conditions at the moment, and guys are moving out of KALOUM, but the density is still very high. It's very overcrowded, and there isn't really the right economic density on that. So we'd like to reduce the density, but with other, and create additional land for development. The economic drivers of KALOUM, specifically for it has a port, it has logistics, and then there's opportunities for real estate, trade, and finance. Social issues, there's large fishing communities on the island that live in the slum areas. They've got a strong sense of community, and surprisingly, their precinct, if you can see on the left, is actually cleaner than most of the streets in Conakry. And they have very little public spaces, so they play soccer in the streets. So Saturday, Sunday, it's very difficult to drive down the streets because most of them are closed for the soccer. Existing land use, in the red, sort of the administrative capital, purple is sort of back of port industries, and the yellow is the residential where you have the slum areas. So in terms of land ownership, approximately half the land is owned by public, and then the private land, the residential. Issues, traffic is horrendous, poor parking management, and then a lot of market activities along the spines where there's the lifeline of the city. It's a dual carriageway, so there's 2 lanes in each direction, but at night time that goes contraflow. So you basically got 4 rows of cars coming on the road, and if you're trying to come into Conakry Friday night, bad luck, it's going to take a long time. And again, the flooding issues, the solid waste management, and then the overcrowded nature of KALOUM and insufficient infrastructure. So looking at the existing constraints, you've got the port, you've got various landmarks like the palace, cemetery, rail line, privately owned land. Looking at opportunities, there's opportunities to convert some of the logistics areas into offices, to re-emphasize the main roads, boulevards, and then expand some of the areas, with some reclamation possibilities, and then create some heritage and cultural centers, and then some other reclamation centers where the current wasteworks treatments is. Looking at some benchmark, this is Singapore Marina Bay, which Sabana Jurong, our partner, our parent company, they were involved right from the start. They were a housing development agency, and they're responsible for much of the transformation in Singapore. So the sort of vision is create distinctive landmarks, which is symbols of progressive nature, and then other benchmarks like in Yokohama in Japan, distinctive landmarks as symbols of transformation. So the issues: urban traffic, environmental, economy vibrancy, social, heritage, and culture. The aspirations to reduce the congestion, to clean up the city, have activities that are less pollutive, a balanced population with improved living conditions, and then also retain the heritage and bring out a stronger cultural identity. So in terms of the positioning of Kaloum and the Loose Islands, at the moment, the Loose Islands are largely underdeveloped, and Kaloum is the CBD and the port. But we see that transforming sort of within 10 years. We'll do some development on the Loose Islands, and Kaloum will change to more of a commercial and a heritage and cultural center, and there's the establishment of a new CBD in Kaloum. And then ultimately in 2040, we see the Loose Islands and Kaloum becoming celebration islands, and then dry port established further out, and growth of the main CBD. So that's the vision we're looking at. I think with the islands, it's a really unique position where you can live in Kaloum and you can travel to these islands, but you really have an opportunity with the waterfront to create something special. So the vision is to make them celebration islands. So it's a place where people celebrate their past and their way to success in times to come. So a place where events can be held, when people can go to relax on the weekends, and you know, attract tourism and other things like that. In terms of the master plan concept, so that's the main sort of structure where we reinforce the boulevards, create a heritage zone, office zone, trade boulevard, and then there's the opportunities to do reclamation with Celebration Bay, People's Bay, Heritage Bay. So those sort of concepts, the heritage zone will have high quality urban environments, shops, residential, trade boulevard, that can be more sort of public amenities, schools, libraries, residential. And then the Republic Avenue, it doesn't really have much of a sense of place at the moment, so that's going to be re-emphasized, supporting mixed-use development. And then Cultural Street, to introduce arts and crafts. And then one of the key things is to introduce a transportation hub, a TOD hub in the center around the existing rail station, and that can be supported by buses as well. And then create an office zone and the logistics zone. The other important aspect is redevelopment of the existing housing. Sorry, I'll get to that a bit further. So that's the reclamation concepts. There's 4 parcels of land where we're looking at creating different developments with different characters. So the first one is a sort of heritage bay, a sort of conservation area with hotels, residences. The second one, the People's Bay, will be more focused on art and culture, entertainment, food and beverage, water sport. Celebration Bay will then have hotels, offices, convention centers, and open spaces where the guys can have events and celebrations. And then Community Island, more villas and leisure. So that's some of the concepts, like the Heritage Bay, the good class housing, marina, landmark hotel, beach, and then incorporating some of the existing landmarks like the Palace Theatre. People's Bay, arts and culture, food and beverage, water sport, residential opportunities. Celebration Bay, shopping malls, theatres, resorts. And then that one on the right, the Noom Hotel, that is actually an existing development. So even in the absence of the master plan, guys are seeing potential and they are investing. And then the Community Island, more residential. For the Loose Islands, each island is different in character and there's different potential for development ideas. Just starting with Casa Island, it's probably the most populated at the moment. There's opportunities to create hotel, resort, golf course, and then water sports activities. Tamora Island is largely unpopulated. It's more of a natural environment, so not much development to be done there. Be more of an adventure sort of island, forest adventure, with a small hotel and resort. Room Island currently has a hotel on it. It's very undeveloped. It's the one that has the nice beaches, so that couldn't be developed very densely. Idea is to have boutique hotels on there, more exclusive. Okay, in terms of the redevelopment plan, addressing the issues of the local housing in those two areas, that's currently what they look like at the moment. Very dense, 590 people per hectare, and about 8 people living in each unit. So the black is the current footprint. So our principle for redevelopment is to select about 10, 11 sites on there. So if you look at an area of sort of 100 by 300 meters, this is an example where we've got a site of, say, 2.3 hectares. And then what we'd do is we would be able to put that out to sort of public tender, where a developer may be able to come in and build high density sort of condominiums up to 15 stories, but then I'd have to accommodate the existing residents within new buildings, sort of low-cost housing, 4 stories. So that's the concept there. The blue is the condominiums, and then the yellow is the low-cost housing. As at the moment, as I mentioned, there's very little open spaces on that, so guys use the streets. So the idea is then to create more open spaces. So that there you can see the sort of 10, 11 redevelopment opportunities. And then dressing up the main roads. That's the existing road, which is the main CBD road. So it's congested, poor parking management, and conflict with the pedestrians. So what we'd look at doing is retaining the sidewalk, making the road one way, introducing 30-degree parking, and then creating wider sidewalks to encourage shopping activities and F&B. That's sort of concept of it. And then other roads adjacent to the existing museum. That's the existing road, nice trees, nice wide road, but not attractive. So the concept would be create a pedestrian street there, which has got a arts and performance feel. The concept. And then importantly, recreating the central project where there's the TOD opportunity. So we've identified various zones to be redeveloped. Blue zone will be a sports zone, retain the only sports field on the island, and then redevelop the old prison and the old station. The idea then is in the central area to create an elevated deck, and beneath that's a bus and rail interchange. So there's the various projects. And then that's the elevated deck. So beneath that you'd have this bus terminal, you have shopping centres, car parks, and the elevated train station. The other problem is the sea level rise. As I mentioned, the island experiences severe flooding, and with climate change and sea level rise, it's only going to get worse. So one of the principles of doing the reclaimed islands is there's an opportunity then to raise the level of those islands, and this will assist us in creating retention ponds where we can attenuate the water, and then via pump systems we could pump that at times of flooding when it coincides with a high tide. So this principle was done in Singapore. They had the same problem there. So this is what they have there. So there's tidal gates, and they have a pump station on the left, which is a public amenity. And then when it coincides with the floods, they pump water over the gates. Alternatively, the gates release the water at low tide back into the sea. Okay, so the revised concept plan, after taking into account the existing project, as we started working through the master planning, a lot of these plans surfaced, and we had to look at how we could incorporate them in some of the deals that had already been signed. There was this project by EGCA, but these plans just basically extended the footprint of the island, and they didn't help us with the rising sea level on that. So where possible, we integrated some of them, but otherwise we've proposed some alternatives. Okay, so what we've done is we've moved the reclamation projects away from the land mass to create water bodies as a feature and address the sea level rise. So we changed some of the configuration of some of the existing plans, created the forest town, Celebration Bay, and then the cruise ship Heritage Bay, that's been retained. So in terms of inland development, the current development, redevelopment of the central area, TOD, and then improving some of the urban streets. And then the other challenge was to create space for infrastructure. So we set aside land for new electrical substations, for new waste transfer stations, and then changing the treatment works to more environmentally friendly, ecological treatment works on a smaller parcel of land. That's just the green network. So in the plan, we created continuity of open spaces. In terms to solve the traffic, with the reclamation, it gives us the opportunity of then creating more mobility routes in the circulation around the island. And then as well with the central development, we can have a transit hub served by BRT and rail, and then the surrounding areas get served by bus stations. Parking, major problem, so any of the new developments would have to make sure there's sufficient parking facilities. And then importantly is the implementation plan, because often these plans are done, and then the authorities are not quite sure on how to go about implementing these. So there's the final concept, and that's the final impression of it. So you can see the grey blocks are all the existing development, and then where we've had to take into account some of the existing proposals, the EGCG one, and then there's all the new projects there. So it'll have to be staged. This is by 2040. And then in terms of the loose island, so just the concept there, Casa Island, back to nature, room, exclusive island, and then tomorrow will be more commercial, theme park. So that's the final impression. Coral, Blanche, left untouched. Room in the center, exclusive island. Tomorrow, more adventure, nature. Casa, more commercial, so golf course. In the middle there, we'll be using renewable energy, so it's a photovoltaic park. In the center is the arrival area from the pier, hotels, and then the theme park to the side. So then what we've done is we've broken these up into key projects. There's 4 types. So there's the redevelopment projects within the existing footprint. Then there's the reclamation projects to create the new developments. And then the sprucing up projects, which is the urban design improvements. And then critical, as I mentioned, all the problems, is the infrastructure projects. All of them need to be addressed. So in terms of a framework, the most important is the implementation management. So we've looked at 4 pillars of implementation. So it's the zoning and urban control, it's the projects and phasing, it's the financing models, and then most important is the implementation management. So we advise the client that they need to set up implementing agent or developing authority that then need to interact with the various districts, the various ministries, and report back to the President's or PM's office. These guys will have the task of looking at the marketing, investment, attracting investors. Project department will prepare the land or packaging of tenders, awards, urban planning department that need to control the zoning, housing department, housing schemes, public works for the infrastructure, and then take that through to construction, monitoring, inspection. The zoning and urban design control needs to be very clear and consistent, and then the guys can use that to assess development applications, and the same for the loose islands. And then this is just example on the phasing, sort of in phase one, we've broken it up for the guys. In the next 10 years, various projects have been identified with a description, and then the funding model, whether it's a PPP or whether it's conditional land tender, where guys bid a price for the land, there'll be a certain reserve, but then they're required to develop the particular area to the master plan. And then infrastructure projects are broken up where all the infrastructure requires upgrading, and then the funding mechanism could either be through government or donor funding. Packaging of the projects. So typically what we've done is we've prepared a brief of each project which defines the scope of the project, the objective, how it'll be implemented, and then these will be taken forward where terms of reference can be written to solicit funding or put it out to bid. So that's just some of the final visions of the projects. That's the one on the housing redevelopment, which then be packaged into tenders. And the same on all the islands, various portions will be packaged. And then that's the reclamation projects, again in packages. And then in terms of infrastructure, major challenges there, but the guys really need to start with a lot of the basics, where they need to increase institutional capacity. They need to put out more contracts for the SMEs, for waste collection, and then they need to improve their equipment, standardized containers and vehicles to transport the waste, and then develop a new landfill site. Water management, again, there's no asset management done at the moment. The guys really need to assess the existing infrastructure, what can be upgraded, and then provide better continuity or redundancy in the system. With the new development, it gives us opportunities of providing ring feeds around the island, and then for the new developments, installing smart meters. Waste management, it is operational, but the critical aspect there is establishing a new treatment works. Stormwater management, a lot of the problem is because of the litter, that the outlets are blocked, or that the floods coincide with high tide. So there's various mechanisms there where we can introduce attenuation areas, or actually outlet control flaps that stop the tide coming in, and then the tidal gates. In terms of power, there's various upgrades that are needed, and refurbishment of the system and expansion of the system. And then ICT is not bad. There's fairly high penetration of voice and internet, but for future growth and introduce smart city principles, new data center be required. In terms of the sprucing up the projects for quick wins to attract further investment, these are the 4 projects that have been identified, various avenues. So there's urban design, materials have been defined. And there's project briefs, which are packaged. And the guys are actually looking for some of the corporates to sponsor some of these projects. They've been broken up into various projects between $100,000 and up to $4 million. So that's the hope, that they will get support from private sector. There's another package, a waterfront walk. Museum Street. And then also one of the quick wins is the Casa Island Gateway to kickstart development of the island, to improve the pier and the arrivals and ablutions and facilities. And then communication of the plan to the community investors is critical. In any city, you should really have a clear plan, and most guys should be working to that. In places like Nairobi, it just doesn't come across that there's a clear, distinct vision of what's coming, and a lot of ad hoc development. So it's an important part of the plan. So we finished the project and we're preparing for the showcase in September, where brochures are produced, panels, multimedias, and then physical models, so exhibited to potential investors and the community. So yeah, it may look like quite an ambitious plan, and even some of the government guys on the committee are sort of dubious as to whether this really can be achieved. But I don't think it's one of those plans where guys are saying these futuristic cities has actually been irresponsible planning, things like that. It's a pragmatic approach to the development, and the philosophy we adopt is you have to set high goals, and you have to work towards achieving those. And if you set a high target, you may achieve close to that. If you set your sights low, that's where you're going to hit. So even if they achieve only half of that redevelopment, you know, it would have achieved a lot of its purpose in the master plan. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Guy.
Thanks, David. Fascinating and a fabulous master plan. The one question I have, which is kind of fundamental, and you started to get into it in terms of the implementation stuff, but I think the huge underlying question for this, as with so many of these schemes, is where's the money coming from?
100%. Look, the economy is growing. Things are happening, and I think, you know, we took comfort from the fact that the Noom Hotel, there's a Palm Cayenne. It's not on KALOUM. It's on the main Conakry. There's substantial investments that are taking place. I think it's just different investors from what we used to. You know, we're not seeing the typical guys at this sort of conference. It's a lot of Lebanese developers. The Moroccans are very interested. I think the company EGCA, they've come across from Gabon, where they've got the construction equipment to do the reclamation. So they've already started doing reclamation and selling off sites. But it's been done piecemeal, and it's not a sort of great quality. So they are already investing, but it needs something like this is needed, and some quick wins, some improvements to attract more investors into the area. So yeah, I mean, it needs to come from donors in terms of infrastructure. They're keen to invest in social and infrastructure programs. But I think when you've got a master plan like this, you know, you'll get more confidence from the guys. You know, you're not just coming along with one isolated application. Your applications are supported by a vision that people can buy into. And I have a lady from SMEC. She is from Guinea, so if there are any specific country questions you need to ask, she can tell you exactly what's what. Thank you. Other questions?